Hello, hello. There we go. Good evening, everyone. I hope you all had a blessed Sabbath day. It's good to see you all back here again to have our evening program. I want to welcome each of you, and once again, thank you, Andrew Jones, for being a willing volunteer. I learned a phrase from David Snavely. It's called voluntold. Have you heard about that? I voluntold Andrew to share with us here, so but he was willing. So we thank him for coming and for sharing with us today. I'm excited about the presentation and what we will learn this evening. So I'd like to go ahead and have an opening word of prayer. Let's bow our heads. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for your holy Sabbath day we've been able to enjoy and be blessed by, and we thank you that Andrew Jones is here to share with us. I pray that you would speak through him as he shares with us about his journeys and the truths that we can learn from in your holy word, and how we can have faith in the message of God's word. We love you and thank you for answering this prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.
Hear me now? There you go. Right, yeah. Good evening, everyone. How are you guys? Having a good Sabbath day? Did you lay activities in? Yeah, I did too. Anyways, tonight we're going to talk about Noah's Ark. Every time Tim says Andrew Jones, I think of his oldest son, Micah, because he taught his son to just say my full name all the time. So, Andrew Jones, Andrew Jones. So, anyways, when I was little, we grew up in Montana and Ohio. And in Ohio, I remember as a little kid, I was fascinated with Noah's Ark. My dad had Rennie Norbergen's book, The Ark File. And so it had, the history of the search for Noah's Ark. And I built this paper, not paper mache, but it was just a bunch of paper that I glued together, and I made a boat, and I had my play animals that would go into it. And that was one of my memories of growing up in Ohio, was building Noah's Ark. Obviously, that would not survive the flood. But tonight we're going to talk about the search, and we're going to talk about one particular site that we've been doing some research in, and some other friends. And how I'm going to present this is I'm just going to present the evidence, and then you make your own mind up, and at the end we'll take questions. Obviously, if you believe the ark is someplace else, that's great. So this is not a big issue where I'm going to argue with anyone on, but I will present what we've done, and then you can see what you think. So let's get started. Some of these slides are from this morning too, but in case someone new's here, my first trip was actually to Turkey. We went to Noah's Ark, this site that we believe is Noah's Ark. Me and a friend were there, and on that very first trip, I was told all these horrible things about going to Turkey. A friend of mine was taken hostage over there in the early 90s, and so he warned me about going over. And so on my very first trip there, I was in Istanbul. I took a break from college, and so I was going to meet my friend the next day on the plane. So I was all by myself, my first trip overseas. It was my second trip overseas, but anyways, I was by myself in Istanbul. And I decided I'm going to leave the hotel and walk around the city. So I go downtown where the Blue Mosque is, and Hagia Sophia, if you know that area. These are big mosques or former Christian churches that have been converted to mosques. And so I was there walking around, and this kid approaches me and says, and asks me, "Do you want to see where I work?" And at first I was startled. I'm like, well, sure. And I wasn't used to saying no to someone, so I was just like, sure, I guess I'll show you, or show me where you work. And so he started leading me down this road, and it was off the main tourist area. And I kept on thinking, where's he taking me? And so it was a couple blocks away. We go to this 2-story building, and he takes me to the second floor. I'm sitting there, and then I realized what he did. It was a rug shop, Turkish rugs. And so his job was to bring the tourists down to the shop, because the shop was off the main area. And so I'm sitting there, and so he leaves me, and so I was like, okay, nice meeting you. So he leaves me there with the owner, and the owner obviously thinks I'm interested in Turkish rugs, and just starts bringing out all these rugs. Now, I have like a backpack and traveling light, because after that I was going to travel to the Philippines for 10 months. So I wasn't really planning to bringing home a huge Turkish rug. No, those rugs cover like the whole living room, and they're thousands of dollars. And so this guy, though, thinks he has a customer, so he just starts piling up all these rugs. Now, before I went to Turkey, I read in, I don't know, one of those guidebooks back then, but I heard a horror story of somebody drinking the Turkish chai, the tea, and it was laced with something, and they woke up with all their stuff taken. They were put to sleep or whatever. And so the guy, the first thing that he did was bring out tea. And so I'm thinking, oh no, I better not drink this, but then will I offend him if I don't drink it, It's just, so I was thinking all these things, and meanwhile, this tea is sitting there, and he's asking me, drink, have some. It's in a little cup. And then he keeps bringing out these rugs. It starts piling up higher and higher. And so finally, I was thinking in my mind, I got to get out of here, because I don't trust the tea, and I obviously can't buy a rug. I'm afraid to say no. So when he goes back to get another rug, I just run out of the building. So I'm just running down the street. And later on, I'm thinking, this poor guy comes out with another rug. I was like, where's his customer? I didn't say anything. I left everything there. I took my bag, and then I ran across the street and went up the hill to the main tourist area where everyone else was at. And I was just scared to death. And I look across the street, and there's the kid who had invited me down to see where he works. Thankfully, he couldn't get across because of the traffic, but he saw me and waved, and probably wondering why I didn't have a rug with me. But anyways, that was my first memory of Turkey, and I'm sure it was all fine, and the chai was fine, but I was paranoid. But anyways, we went back a couple times in 2000. We met with a Turkish geologist. We'll talk more about this guy. And then after that, we were focused mainly on archaeology in Israel, so it wasn't until 2013 that we went back and started doing some film work. And we met up with an Adventist geologist from New Zealand. It was the springtime of that year, and so really beautiful over there. But we got up to near, this site is by the Iranian border. So there's a lot of Turkish military installations around this area protecting the border. And so we wanted to get near the border, and we'll talk about why. There's a piece of evidence up there we were trying to look for. And so we rented a local tractor. The kid hired it, we hired a kid who drove it, and we ended up going up to the border, and until the Turkish soldiers kicked us out and said we couldn't go up there. Friendly people, but the soldiers like, no, you're not allowed up here. But anyways, just showing you what it's like there, and here's a video showing us. We had, I think, 5 of us all trying to fit in this tractor. And this is June, so really pretty up there. We met a bunch of Turkish women
this is easier. Can you get the
who were collecting the flowers to make tea.
Yeah, that's
We're about at 9,000 feet elevation there.
Yes.
You want to hold this?
Yes, I do.
So that's our tractor.
You want that to touch it.
That'll be Brandon.
We're trying to get 6 people in here.
Oh, you already got it. Camera. Hold it just for a second. I'll get it.
Okay, now just me.
My camera guy trying to get in. Anyways, and then after that, I was going down the hill. We met.
The size of that.
Oh, they're beautiful.
Wow.
Get lots of pictures. Oh, I can take it.
Yeah.
Oh. Hey.
Oh, look at that dog. I want that dog.
Dog has spikes.
I know.
That's those spikes so the wolf will get in.
Hard to bite his throat.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Turkish sheepdogs are very vicious there. You don't pet them. Only the owners will come around them. And they have spikes around their collars so that when they get in a fight with the wolf can't bite their throat. So they walk around with spiked collars. And they attack our cars when you're driving by. This one, because he's with the owner, he didn't approach us, but he was watching his sheep. Anyways, we went back again twice in 2014, doing more video work, and then some initial measurements for the site we were going to investigate in the fall of 2014. And the guy on the left is the friend from New Zealand who got the permit, which we'll talk about, to do some work on this site. Turkish people are wonderful people. We talked about this morning how friendly the locals were in Saudi Arabia and Turkey. I think is one of my favorite countries in the region. The Turkish food's awesome. The kids and locals. Even though my first trip I was paranoid, every trip I've been there I've never had any problems. And you see a lot of sheep everywhere. So while we talked about the camels in Saudi Arabia this morning, Eastern Turkey is full of sheep. And they take over the road, and you just kind of let them go by. I'm just quickly going through these so you can see. Now this area is actually mainly Kurds. So this is the mixture of Turks and Kurds. And it's right on the border of Iran and Armenia. So if you know a little history, when the fall of the Ottoman Empire happened, there was a big war between the Turks, and Armenia, which is a Christian country right there. And the Turks took over a lot of Armenian territory. So this area here used to be Christian territory. So a lot of knowledge from the people who used to live there for ages were lost when the Muslims took over this area. Now, one site where we found a lot of fossils, these kids were there, and they ended up helping us find fossils, super friendly. We didn't speak Kurdish or Turkish, and they didn't speak English, but they knew how to do the peace sign and take photos with us. Now, the interest in Noah's Ark, kind of like like we talked about this morning on the Ten Commandments. Obviously, Hollywood sees a good story, but they have to enhance it. At least they think they do. And I don't know if anyone saw the Russell Crowe movie on Noah, where rock monsters basically protect the ark. These are screenshots from the film, and they believe, in the movie, I think these are the Nephilim, or the giants before the flood, and they believe that these fell from heaven to protect Noah. They basically twist the theology all around. So the fallen angels are good people in this movie. It's just, yeah, you're very twisted. But the story, though, has captured the imaginations of builders, people like this guy from New Zealand, not New Zealand, from Netherlands. He said he had a vision or a dream from God to build an ark as a witnessing tool in Europe. So he actually built one on a barge in Netherlands. And obviously, who's been here to like the Kentucky one, just north of here? Yeah, opened last year, I think. Yeah, so some friends have been there. I'd like to go up there, but it's a really awesome one, I heard. 500 feet long, and inside it has a lot of exhibits explaining the creation story and the flood to show that the flood did happen. Now, there's also another life-size one in Hong Kong that some Christian Chinese built, and this one's a little different. This one's a 4-star restaurant and hotel. So you can imagine that probably Noah didn't have this type of fine dining on his. And you can see this is actually a photo of the hotel room, and yeah, so Noah and his wife and the others did not have this, I assume. In 2014, in the news, Noah's Ark was mentioned because this British archaeologist, this guy, Irving Finkel, he's in charge of the cuneiform tablets in the British Museum in London, and he basically claimed that he had reinterpreted this one clay tablet that had the flood story, and he believed that this tablet described a different type of ark. And this is what he said the tablet described it as a floating like saucer. So in his idea, the ark was actually a round thing. And I'm thinking they would get dizzy if they're twirling around in the storm. But this guy probably was not a shipbuilder, this archaeologist. So, but he got in the news, and so he made himself famous because of this. But earlier, the year before, I think it was the year before, but anyways, in a scientific magazine, some physics students did a study, could Noah's Ark float? And they said they were surprised that based on their measurements and calculations, the ark could handle over 2 million animals, I believe, 2.15 million sheep, which they suggest that sheep would be the average size of the animals, if they were like baby animals or something. But anyways, in their calculations, they said the ark would float in the storm. It was sufficient, it had sufficient buoyancy. And this was in the November 2013 Journal of Physics. So scientists were amazed that the dimensions and the information given in the book of Genesis was correct, is correct. Of course, we know by faith that obviously it's correct. Now, the account of the flood and Noah building the ark and where it rested is in the 3 chapters in Genesis. We're not going to go over them. I assume most people here know about the story of how wicked the earth was, and then God, by grace, selecting Noah and his family, and told Noah exactly how to build the ark, and then the flood coming, and then the ark resting in the mountains of Ararat. So we're not going to go over that, but if you do want to read that, you can check Genesis chapters 6, 7, and 8. Now, Ellen White does have some really interesting quotes about the construction of the ark, and so here are 2 of them about the wood. Now that she talks about how the stones before the flood, the trees before the flood were like stones, and which is really interesting. She says here, their wood was of fine grain and hard substance, closely resembling stone and hardly less enduring. Patriarchs and Prophets. And then she talks about even with their the great strength of the people before the flood, being giants and stronger than we are today. She said it took a bit to still construct the ark because the wood before the flood was so strong and like stone. And then here's another quote. She talks about even every aspect of the ark was given by God to Noah. So there was nothing left to chance. And if you read later on in that chapter, I believe, or the next chapter on the flood itself, actually might be the same chapter, she talks about how even though God had given all these directions, angels of great strength had to protect the ark during the flood. It was such a great storm. And she says that Satan had, God forced Satan to stay on earth and endure this, and he was scared for his life. So you can imagine how strong, think of the hurricanes that come through this area. It was thousands of times stronger than that to destroy the whole earth. And then I underlined in this quote a part that talks about the hull of Noah's Ark. Now there's different ideas of how the ship looked like. You see models or people who say they've seen it, and it looked like a barge, a square-shaped boat. Others have it more like a ship. Now she talks about here that the hull was like a ship, but then above it, she's more like resembling a house. So it kind of gives you an idea of what she saw. Now, where did the ark land after the flood? Now, if we're going to try to find it, we need to know where. Obviously, we're not going to look for Noah's Ark in Florida, right? So we need to kind of give it a general area. The Bible's very brief. It just has one verse, Genesis chapter 8, verse 4. And it says, the ark rested in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, upon the mountains of Ararat. Now, notice that it says mountains, plural. A lot of times today, when you hear, especially during the 80s, when they did a lot of ark hunting in eastern Turkey, everyone was focused on one mountain. And we're going to talk about why that mountain has a problem. But the Bible doesn't really give us one mountain. It just tells us the region. Now, Ararat here, this verse is basically saying something like the ark landed in the mountains of Colorado or the mountains of Canada, because Ararat is actually a country. It was a country back then. And so this was the mountainous region of that country that Moses said the ark landed. And that's all he's giving us. Now, if you look at a map of the Middle East, we're going to focus in on the country, modern country of Turkey, and the eastern part of Turkey, where this country of Ararat, or Urartu, as it's called, is mentioned. Now, these red stars show some of the archaeological sites of the Urartian kingdom, and it's all focused on the eastern part of the country and the mountains there. Now, if you look at ancient quotes outside of the Bible from historians, even they say there was an ark to look at for pilgrims to go to and tourists. And so here's a quote from Berosus, a Chaldean historian from 257 BC, so 257 years or so before Christ. He talks about this ship being grounded in the country of Armenia, and he said you can still see it to that day. And here's another quote. Now, this is around the time of Christ, 50 A.D., and Nicholas of Damascus writes about a great mountain in that area and where the ship landed, and how Moses, the legislator of the Jews, wrote about it. Now, the famous Jewish historian, Josephus, he talks about it. Now, a lot of these other quotes are actually from his work. He preserves these historians' works. And he talks about the ark resting in this mountain in Armenia, and that you can still see the remains there. He talks about that. And then into the Christian era, in the 4th century AD, we have a couple Christian bishops and historians talking about Noah's Ark being in the country of the Kurds, country of Armenia. And again, that's eastern Turkey there. So this focus of the modern day focus for the search for Noah's Ark has been in this area of eastern Turkey. Now, because the highest mountain in eastern Turkey and the country of Turkey is Mount Ararat, that's where the focus has been by a lot of modern Ark hunters. The earliest reference to Mount Ararat being the place where Noah's Ark landed was in 425 AD. So it was a long time after the Bible was written. People started saying, this is the spot. And, they're trying to use logic, saying, oh, well, it's the highest mountain. So as the flood waters came down, the Ark would have landed on the highest point. And we're going to talk about that in a bit. So the problem with Mount Ararat, or I'll go back, this is the Turkish name, Agri Dagi, and it means the mountain of pain in Turkish. But the problem with this mountain that everyone's focused in on is it's a stratovolcano, which means it built itself up by subsequent eruptions. So if you know anything about like Mount St. Helens and some of these other mountains, they're very similar. They are called by geologists stratovolcanoes. And here's the little animation kind of giving you an idea how these stratovolcanoes are formed. Oops. Every time there's an eruption, the mountain gets taller and taller. So it basically forms a cone. So I'll give you some examples of other stratovolcanoes around the world that are similar to Mount Ararat. This one is Mount Taranaki in New Zealand. You can see it's a perfect cone, and it has you can see the lava flow around it, so like a perfect circle. This one, I don't know when the last eruption was, but this is a stratovolcano. Some of these mountains you'll recognize. The one on the left is, again, Mount Taranaki. The top right is Mount Rainier in Washington. And the one on the bottom is Mount Fuji in Japan. These are all stratovolcanoes. Now here are some examples of stratovolcanoes, of Ararat, showing you how it's a volcanic mountain that's built up. No one disagrees that it's a volcanic mountain. These are photos that our team took throughout the years going over there. You can see how massive, it has one of the biggest bases of mountains in the world for volume. And right beside it is another smaller cone. They call it Little Ararat. And here's a photo we took this March when we were there during the winter time. Now they have a year-round glacier on top of Mount Ararat. So again, if you know the effects of glaciers, glaciers shed itself. They're always moving. And so if the Ark did land on the summit of Ararat, glaciers over the last 4,000 years would have moved it off and crushed it probably. If you go to Scotland or other areas where you see the effects of glaciers, Yosemite, you see glaciers carve out whole valleys when they move. So again, with this glacier on top of this volcanic mountain, you have other issues with if you're saying the Ark is up there somewhere. Now here's a NASA satellite just showing you the two mountains, Ararat and Little Ararat. Now if you look in this photograph at the base, those are dried lava flows, and they're about 100 or so feet high. A massive amount of lava in the past have flowed down there, and they're all dried up now. The last eruption was in 1840, and we're going to talk about that in a second. So the last eruption created on the northern face of the mountain, the Ahura Gorge. Now, if you're interested in Noah's Ark research, you'll know that a number of people claim that Noah's Ark is in this gorge, and that they've seen it perfectly preserved, or it's in two sections. And the problem is this gorge was formed by an eruption that was very similar to Mount St. Helens. It blew out the whole side of the mountain, killed 10,000 people, destroyed villages at the base and a monastery on that side. And you can see where the arrow is at, pointing out that gorge. And here's a photograph. I was just at Mount St. Helens before I flew to Orlando. It was my first time there seeing the mountain. You can see at the Johnston Visitor Center, this same view here, where you're looking into the crater. So here's Mount St. Helens again, the before and after, how it blew out the side of the mountain. Very similar to the 1840 eruption. Now, a famous story among Ark hunters is this one where an Armenian kid says It was in 1970 he was interviewed, but he says when he was a kid, he claims his grandfather took him up to Noah's Ark and set him on the ark, and he explored it. And so Alfred Lee, the Adventist artist, drew this. He was the one who interviewed the guy, and he drew this painted this of what the kid described, what he saw. The only problem is no one's ever found this up there. And again, we're talking about issues with whether Mount Ararat was even around during the flood. Being a volcanic mountain, if you're thinking about, was it erupting during the flood? Was it around? And especially if you read Ellen White, it's most likely the mountain was not even there, because all the evidence of the lava shows that this eruption happened after the flood. The lava was not formed underwater. So if you've been to Hawaii, you've probably seen pillow lava, it's called. It's lava that forms underwater when it erupts, and there's no evidence of pillow lava on Mount Ararat. So the mountain itself was formed above water post-flood, so it wasn't even around. Though ark hunters have looked all over the summit. One guy was looking at this photo from the CIA. He thought, oh, maybe that looked like the shape of a boat, and they went up there, didn't find anything, but this was in 2003. It was in the news about this anomaly they're looking at. 2010, I think, or was it 14, they made this film about the search, and they brought radar up there, and they were drilling in the ark. You can see this film on Amazon. I think it's on Netflix. A couple years later, another group thought, they made a big announcement about the ark being found, and they showed photographs, and they found garbanzo beans and whole rooms preserved, and it was a Chinese group, and they had this big announcement. And they brought in a Christian archaeologist with them from the U.S., and later on he had a lot of misgivings about it, and then he wrote a whole long article explaining why they probably were a big hoax. And since that time, nothing has come of this story. And in fact, we find out from some of our local contacts in the area, they know some of the Kurds who were guides showing these Chinese groups where the site was, and they found out that the Kurds had planted the wood up there the summer before, when the snow was melted, and then the next winter, it froze in place, and then the next year they brought the Chinese over. And you were like, why would they do all that effort? Well, I talked to one of the guys on this team, and he said they were charged $40,000 a person to go up there. And so they had a pretty big team, so you can see it's a money-making thing for the local economy, and why they would want to do all this work to do a hoax. So in my opinion, I think I would agree with the title of this book by Mary Irwin. Now, her husband, Jim Irwin, walked on the moon. He believed, he's passed away, but he believed that Noah's Ark existed. He was involved in the search for Noah's Ark, and he was a Christian, a creationist. But after he had passed away, she wrote this book called The Unsolved Mystery of Noah's Ark. And based on all the searches and all the evidence, in her mind, it had not been solved yet. And that's basically, in my opinion, if you're looking for the Ark on Ararat itself, it's unsolved. There's nothing there. But we have been interested in another mountain. Before I get into that, I guess I have some quotes here from Ellen White. We're going to look at them first. This is from Patriarchs and Prophets. Notice her description of the area where Noah's Ark landed. I bolded it and underlined it there. Now, the key thing is that she talks about how it went to a group of mountains, plural, and how those mountains were preserved by God through the flood. They were built a little distance apart, and then she says that the ark would land on one and then another. And this quote from Spirit of Prophecy, Volume 1. And basically she's talking about a cluster of mountains that the ark was moving around in right at the end of the flood when it was resting. And so this goes all against the whole theory that the ark landed on this tall peak called Mount Ararat that's all by itself. Now, there's another site right across the valley that we have been interested in and others in the past. And you might have seen this in the news or heard about it from others. And we recently did some research there, and we're going to talk about that. It's called the Durupınar site. It's named after a Turkish captain who found it in their NATO photographs. And you can see the boat, or the boat-shaped formation there. They found it in 1959. And it hit the news, and everyone was like, is this Noah's Ark? You know, it's in the region of Ararat. And so this guy, who's a world-famous Armenian Turkish photographer, was the first person on the ground. He hired a private plane in 1960, and he went out there, And we met him last year. He's still alive. And he owns a restaurant in Istanbul. He's famous for his photography of Istanbul. And there's Nathan, my friend, who is our photographer, and myself. So Nathan took this photograph of him. He has a great personality, this guy. We were going to interview him for our film we're doing on the search for Noah's Ark. And these are some of his original photographs when he hired the plane that flew over the same object that the NATO pilot found. It's just sitting there in a mud flow. And then here's some shots. He went on the ground and walked over to the object. Now, later on that year, an Adventist team went there, and Life magazine on September 5th of that 1960 wrote up a piece about it. Rennie Norbergen, the Adventist author, actually wrote the article, and he was on the expedition. And George Vandeman, a number of other Adventist personalities and famous Adventists, they were on this team. And this is the article. You can, if you have the 1960 edition, you can look it up. It's about, has Noah's Ark been found? And a friend of mine has all the original photographs from that expedition, and so she gave me some copies to use. And so this is one of the photographs. You can see this ship-shaped formation that's sitting there in the mud flow. And on this trip, right in that area where the red circle is, they blew a hole in the side of it. Towards the end, because it's all covered in dirt, they weren't sure like what's holding the site together. So they had an Adventist archaeologist with them, but against his judgment, they went ahead and decided to use dynamite in archaeology, which obviously you don't use. But the Turkish soldiers had dynamite, so they blew a hole in it. It didn't go too far down, but because they just pulled out what they thought were rocks and pieces of dirt, they believed it was negative in their view for being Noah's Ark. But one guy still believed that there was something there because he said in his mind there's no doubt that this is a man-made object or a ship because nothing in nature would make this. And this guy is Dr. Arthur Brandenberger, who is an expert in studying photogrammetry. And so at that time when he saw this, he said there's no way nature could have formed this shape. Now, in this area where the ark, where that shape is, and Mount Ararat, across the border is the country of Armenia. Now, they have found some of the oldest items. So these were obviously post-flood items. This is the oldest shoe ever found, for example. This was found, I don't know, I think 5 or 6 years ago. It's stuffed with grass. Now, they claim it's 5,500 years old. But anyways, it's definitely, after the flood. But you can see where civilization started after the flood in this area. A lot of things are there. Now, can you guess what this is? Anybody? A rock. It is petrified in a sense, so it might be. But it's the oldest brain ever found. It's a young girl's brain they found in the caves in Armenia. There, you're looking at brain matter, yeah. And then they found the oldest winery. Remember the story of Noah after the flood? Rolled right across the border from this area. The oldest winery has been found in Armenia. And on top of it, some of the most advanced metal smelting foundries have been found. At this site in Armenia, they've had evidence of different types of extraction for gold, copper. They also talk about manganese and zinc and iron. And they also did bronze, which is an alloy. So, the people after the flood obviously had, still the knowledge. Obviously, we believe that before the flood, men were more advanced. Now, if you were to go to the site that I'm going to talk about, that we did our research on, you don't have to pay $40,000 to a Kurdish guide. And in fact, you can take the main road to Iran. We're about 20 kilometers from the border. And the Turkish government has been very helpful. They put a little sign up that says Nuhum Gemisi, or Noah's boat. And then in English, they misspelled Noah, but it says Noah's Ark. 5 kilometers up the mountain. And you can take this really narrow road. Thankfully, they've added guardrails recently, up to about 6,500 feet elevation. And it's near this village of Uzungeli, a Kurdish village overlooking the valley. And you can see Mount Ararat across the valley. And in 1987, the Turkish government built a little visitor center there and put up another sign. And you can see this photograph is from our October trip in 2014. And the visitor center is pretty run down. See, it hasn't weathered too well over the years. But again, it was built in 1987, so you can see why. They have really harsh winters there. But thankfully, last year, they renovated the whole center, and here are some photographs we took in March of this year. And they redid everything and redid the roof, and the inside is really beautiful. They layered, it's all wood, and they paneled the whole thing, and they're going to add in the furniture later and some displays and posters about that site. Now, I'm going to give you a little tour of the site. So I don't think anyone here has been there. So I'm going to describe some interesting things about the site so you can understand when we get to the evidence what we're talking about. Now, this is the 1960 expedition photograph. Notice the red arrows pointing to the edges of the boat-shaped formation. In 1977, an American went over there to look at, to rediscover the site, and in 79, an earthquake had hit it. And here's a photograph from our 2014 trip. You can see the same edges where the soil has dropped away and kind of popped up the object in the mud formation. And here, again, the same type of photograph taken the year before. Again, here's the 1960 photograph of the site, and then here's 2014, showing how, especially down on the lower end where the soil had dropped after the earthquake, exposing more of the site. And here's mid-80s, I think 85, this photograph was taken. Just sitting there, yeah, it looks like the remains of a boat. You can actually see sheep in this photograph on the bottom left. So here are a couple, here's a drone shot my friend took in 2010, and compare that with the NATO photograph from 1960, or 59. Just showing it sitting there. And if you can go to Google Maps, you can actually find the site. Just type in Uzungeli village, and it'll go right to, and I'll show you, that's the boat-shaped formation there. You can see it has weathered a lot since that earthquake had dropped the edges. And so it's really jagged on the edges. You can see us here taking photographs, and that's that same eastern edge there where it's kind of jagged, where the sheep are at. Now here's some drone imageries that some friends have took that will kind of give you a better view of this ship formation just sitting there exposed in the mud flow. These were taken last year, these recent ones here. And then here's one that was, this one right here was taken a couple weeks ago. A friend of mine just got back. And we're going to actually be there at the end of this month. So in 2 weeks, we'll have our own drone flying over this. If you were to look at the arc shape there, and the red arrow, you can see the visitor center at the bottom on the little hill overlooking it, and then the village of Uzungeli, the purple arrow. This is the Kurdish village that overlooks the site. Now, what about the shape of the site? What's really interesting, as we mentioned, Dr. Brandenberger talked about how there's no way nature could create the shape. Now, some critics will say, oh, this shape was formed because it's in a mud flow, and you have this rock in the middle, and then the mud goes around the rock, and it forms a streamlined shape. The biggest issue that disproves all that is that the pointed end is uphill. So if this was an obstruction in a mud flow, then that rounded end would be uphill, and the pointed end would be downhill. So if you look at a stream and the water flowing around an object, it just keeps going like that, and it forms where downhill is the pointed end. So this is the very opposite. And so, again, the question is, well, what is creating the shape and what's maintaining it over all these years? And so we believe that there's something underneath there. So let's look at the evidence. So we're going to talk about the size. Does it fit the biblical description? And again, the Bible is very brief about the architecture of Noah's Ark and the size. It just has one verse, and it says it was 300 cubits wide, 50 cubits in width, and 30 cubits high. We're going to talk about one of these measurements. Obviously, if we were to excavate it, we can determine how high it is based on what's preserved still. And we'll talk a little bit about the breadth. But in regards to the length of it, the 300 cubits, before we even get to that, we need to decide what cubit they used. Now, some of you know in the Old Testament, they had basically two types of cubits. One being, later on, they called the Hebrew cubit, which was about 18 inches long. It was a shorter cubit. And then the longer one, which the Royal Egyptian cubit, which they call the Royal Egyptian cubit, and a lot of the ancient world used that. So which cubit did Moses use? Here's a cubit measuring stick found in the treasure for King Tut. So King Tut was during the time of the Exodus, during the time of Moses, somewhere around there, the 18th dynasty. And the Royal Egyptian cubit is about 20.62 inches long. So they have actually these little measuring rods that give you exactly the length of a cubit for the Egyptians. And now the Sumerians had a very similar one. This was 20.42 inches, so very, very similar. Now, according to Encyclopedia Britannica, the Royal Egyptian cubit was the standard measurement, kind of like metric system is around the world outside the U.S. And this is a quote from Encyclopedia Britannica talking about the 20.62 inches. Now, the book of Acts talks about how Moses was learned in the wisdom of all the wisdom of Egypt. And you can, if you read Josephus, the Jewish historian, and Ellen White, she talks about how he was a general, he was trained in the royal courts. He definitely knew about the Royal Egyptian cubit. So the question is, did he use it when he wrote the book of Genesis and Exodus and other places that mention cubits in his writings? And we're going to get to that in a second. Here's an example of the size of the ark compared to modern ships and semi-modern. You can see the Santa Maria, where Columbus used. It was a little under, I think, 100 feet. Yeah, 62 feet long. The longest wooden ship was the Wyoming schooner, and it was a little over 450 feet long. Now, the other ships are steel. The Titanic and the Queen Mary were steel ships. And you can see how Noah's Ark would be basically the longest wooden ship ever built. Now, if you read Ellen White in Patriarchs and Prophets, she gives the dimensions of the tabernacle. Now, what's really interesting is she gives it in feet, not in cubit. So if you know the cubit that Moses used in the book of Exodus for the tabernacle, you can work your way backwards and figure out the size of the cubit. Now, when you do that, I put the math up there. When you take her dimensions especially for like the most holy place, the breadth and height being 18 feet. You know, the most holy was a cube, 18, 18, 18, in her writings. But in Exodus, Moses describes it as 10 cubits wide, high, and tall. So based on this, you take an 18 feet, times it by 12 inches, you get the number of inches, divide that by 10 cubits to figure out how many inches per cubit, and her writings come out basically to the longer cubit. What she says Moses used was you can call it the Royal Egyptian cubit, or the longer cubit. And the reason why this is important is when you go to measure the site, it is exactly 515 feet long. So if you do the measurements, 300 cubits times 20.62 inches, divide that by 12 to get feet, you come out with that measurement. So, you know, maybe it's a freak of nature, but one piece of evidence shows that it's exactly the length of the ark. Now, just looking at the same shape, so obviously we don't know the depth yet because no one has excavated the site. Or, you know, maybe it's only 2 of the floors remain. We don't know after 4,000 years what's left. In regards to the width, it has a ship-shaped formation. So there's different theories as regards to what Moses said about the 50-cubit width of the boat. It could be the average between the shape, or also the shape could be today what we're looking at is the splayed out remains after the ark had decayed. So it is in the widest point 138 feet. So it is a little wider than the 50 cubits mentioned in Genesis. So you have two ideas in regards to how that width got there, whether the ark just decayed out and got wider, or it's the average because it's a boat-shaped formation. Now, no one has excavated the object, and we're going to talk about some future plans there, but because of that, the Turkish government has let people do other types of research. So one of the first things someone's done was in the 1980s, and in 2006, they used metal detectors to see if there's a pattern of metal on this supposedly man-made object. And what they did find is that there is this pattern every so often with these metal detectors. It beeps, and when they connect the dots, it forms lines. And basically, here's an example that we'll talk about this rock that's right in the middle, but the lines wrap around it as if the ship had impaled itself on this rock and damaged it on the one side. But because of that, because of this metal detector scans that show this pattern of metal just inside the object, not outside in the mud flow, only inside, others got interested. And here, a friend of mine did one in 2007 here and got the same type of pattern of metal. Now, so you're wondering, well, what's in the Ark? I thought the Ark was just made of gopher wood. Here's some photographs of a fridge magnet, and the site is full of metal fragments. This is leaching out, and here's a little video clip. You can just take this fridge magnet and kind of put it over the soil, and this collects all sorts of little fragments. And then here's a close-up of that same. So then you're asking yourself, well, what's the metal doing there? In the book of Genesis, so chapter 4 is obviously before the flood, Moses talks about Tubal-Cain, who worked with metal. And notice the type of metal he worked with, one being iron, but the other being bronze. Now, bronze is an alloy between copper and tin, so it's mixing two different metals. So they had advanced knowledge of alloys, just like we have today. And then, as I mentioned, iron too. Now, this is all before the so-called Iron Age. So in archaeology, archaeologists think that we obviously evolved. So they have different types of metals to describe the ages. So they go from the Neolithic, being the Stone Age, down to the Bronze, to the Iron Age. So I think iron is being the more advanced. Now, that's true in a lot of regions in the world, but they disregard the biblical account that before the flood, they had advanced knowledge. And if the ark was made before the flood by Noah, the ark would have advanced type of technology in it, like the metal work. And so here's an example of alloys being used before the flood from Genesis chapter 4:22. Now, what could these metal readings be from? Now, in 1991, a tour group that a friend of mine was on, they were over there looking at the object, and at the uphill end, which is the southern end of the boat, what turned out to be a fossilized rivet was found that has been analyzed. And here's some photographs. These photographs here were taken last year. My friend Nathan and I, we built this light box, and this object, the Turks had let a friend of mine take out of the country to analyze in the US back in the 90s. And so here's some photographs of the same object. Now, what was interesting about this object is that it was made of some advanced alloys: titanium, iron, and aluminum. Now, titanium as an alloy was not used until the early 1900s. And this object here that was found on the ship-shaped formation, the arc shape, had advanced metals in it. Now, on top of that, they analyzed the difference of carbon in the metal area, and then what obviously could be petrified wood behind. And they found that the area that could be petrified wood had higher carbon, showing that possibly once fossilized wood, once living material from a tree, versus the iron part, the fossilized rivet part. Now, on the eastern side of that, there are also other of these circular, but these are oxidized, and nothing's left of it but the shape. And I took these photographs in 1997, my first trip. We found this, and a friend of mine, 3 years later, Kevin Fisher, he analyzed this, and it has the same exact ratio as that fossilized rivet of titanium, iron, and aluminum. Now, it's pretty decayed today. There's not much left of some of these. Because sitting there exposed to the elements. This is from October 2014, some of this. Now, they retested the rivet with X-ray diffraction 2 years ago, in 2015, and what they found was that on the front side, which has supposedly the oxidized, the petrified fossilized rivet, it has 2 times as much iron as the backside, which is supposed to be fossilized wood. So again, it's showing that this is 2 different types of objects right there that has been preserved. So a rivet would be like a metal plate, where when it's hot, they would strike it and hold in place a nail or some type of thing that would go into the wood. So this is what these metal patterns are showing up on the metal detector scans. And here's some of the analysis there. Now, besides metal detector work, they've done subsurface radar. Now, radar shoots a signal into the earth about 50,000 times a second. And this helps map out what you see below ground without actually digging. So archaeologists use this to look for things underground without having to remove all the dirt. So between 1986 and 87, they scanned the whole object. And now what they found is a pattern only inside the object, not on the outside in the mud. Based on the experts who have analyzed the scans, they said this is no way could be natural. And so here's an example of one of the scans across the top end. And I'll go back and forth there. And basically, it produces what, we don't know what it is, but basically something that is not natural. There's this pattern of lines underground there, which could be walls, support beams. And again, here's a section of the printout. And here's a quote from one of the guys who analyzed it. They make the equipment. He says they're too periodic, meaning it's a pattern. He says in nature you would not find that type of interface. So again, it's a way of looking under the ground without having to dig yet. Now in 1987, the Turkish government dedicated a visitor center there. So they had the military officials, you can see a military guy there. They had the governor, Turkish radio and television, TRT, and they asked an American to demonstrate the radar that they were using on the Ark site. And they demonstrated it here at the southern end of the boat, the downhill end, which is north. And this is what they were able to find. So they had the printout, and the governor asked the Turkish soldier to dig out what they saw on the radar printout. And within 2 feet, the printout showed something like an object there. And so within the 2 feet down where they dug, they pulled out this piece of what ended up to be petrified wood. This is 18 inches long, 2.5 inches thick, but it's 37 pounds, super heavy. And the reason why it's so heavy is that when they did the analysis, it's 13% iron. So when it was petrified, it just leached in the iron molecules, and it turned this into stone, but also a lot of iron is in it. Now, when they did a thin section of the petrified wood, they found out that it's actually forms of layers. There are layers in it. And you can even see on the very edge where the arrow is pointed on one of the layers, there's like a material that's kind of oozing out that's been petrified. In 1990, on the uphill end, which is south, where that arrow is pointed, they did what we call the mini excavation. Again, no permits were given to actually do a full-scale dig yet, but they took shovels, sharpened them, and you can see here a photograph from one of the video clips of that mini excavation, and they basically shaved a couple inches off the whole side of that exposed area. Again, they have harsh winters there, so anything that gets exposed crumbles and decays and gets covered in, wind blowing in dirt and whatever. But when they shaved off the dirt for a couple inches, this is what they found. Here's some photographs of them shaving the dirt off. So if you can't see that, I'll highlight it. So these aren't solid, again, so because it's exposed near the surface, they're basically just tiny fragments. But when you shave it all off, you can see that there are remains, that can't be natural. I'm sorry for those who say, oh, this is a natural object we're looking at. Now there were 10 of those found on this one area they had shaved off, right near the pointed end. And then right above the object, we're talking about this being within 1 mile of the Iranian border. So, very sensitive area with Turkey and Iran. But in the mid-'80s, right at the top, exactly on the border, ancient stele was found that had an inscription on it. And so we're kind of looking up towards the border with the arrow in the middle. This is an old photograph from the 1980s. Again, we're looking at the same thing now, just from 2013. And so here's the Google Earth showing you the green below, the green boat shape. That's where the object is right now. And if you go right up the valley, about 1.25 miles near the Iranian border, we see the yellow line. And then that star there, this is where this inscription was found. Now here's the video that was took during the 1980s. And the person had asked one of his Turkish friends to take it, but he's telling the guy you'll see him here. He tells him to keep filming. Basically, they're standing behind this ancient inscription, but he doesn't want the locals to know that they're interested in the inscription. And the reason why, when you're over there, if you show any interest in anything, the locals, when you leave, will dig it up, destroy it, sell it, make pieces out of it, So he's making sure that the guys, because when they found this, he didn't want them to know that they're really interested. He thought they're just, taking a photograph. So this is why they just keep kind of panning through it. But when you look at the some still photographs of it, we're going to look at some close-ups. And they actually, later on, when he went back to the site, the actual stele itself, this stone column was broken up into different border pieces. So you can see here it's been reused, some of the pieces with cinder block and the Turkish border marker with Iran. This is from April 1989, that photograph. Now, some of the petroglyphs, so just the drawing part, when pieced together, this is what it shows. Now notice what I've highlighted in, or circled in red. Notice the shape from that petroglyph. Does it seem like something you just saw a couple slides ago? I'll go back. They had a very similar. Now obviously, if you look at the inscription too, it has two probably birds. They look like, you know, stylized birds. And then they have this ridge, and then an ancient, and then a mountain beside it. And we're going to talk about that in a second. So I point out the ridge and the inscription. And then that's the ridge today. In fact, when you're driving in the valley below, that's the first thing you see, this big saddleback ridge. That is basically Iran, just on the other side of that ridge. It's about 10,000 feet right there on the elevation. Now, we went up there in 2014. We met with the Turkish military at the top, trying to get access to this site. Again, it's a sensitive site because of human trafficking. A lot of illegals come over from Afghanistan and Central Asia. They come through this route to get to Europe. And so the Turkish government, in fact, right now is building a wall through that area. I don't know if they were inspired by certain American presidents, but they're building a wall there too. And so that we're concerned because it's going to go right through where this stele is. So when we met them, this was 3 years ago, you know, we didn't know they were going to build a wall. But at that time, the guy told us, well, we're trying to keep you know, our relationship with Iran up, so we don't want you guys to be anywhere near this is in no man's land, basically. And we were within a quarter mile, basically on your right, looking that way. That's where that stele is located. So we talked to them, we showed them the photographs, and then a couple of the soldiers said, oh yeah, we've seen that before. We're like, well, can we see it? So we obviously would like to get better pictures and piece it all together because it's supposed to also be an inscription, not just the petroglyphs, so there's supposed to be writing on it. Anyways, so that wall, we talked to the company building that wall this year, and they are interested in helping us. So the thought is that when they go through that area to construct the wall, they'll take down the pieces for us. So since we can't go up there, they'll do it for us, and then we can document it. So we'll see. Hopefully they don't destroy the thing. Now, right across this one hill over, so less than a mile from this boat-shaped formation, is are a lot of fossils. So, and it's along this ridge right here. You can see where the arrows are pointing out. This exposed ridge. And the cool thing about these fossils, they're mainly sand dollars, and all broken up. I did not get a piece of one of them. You know, I have this geological hammer I bought a couple days ago on Amazon, and I'm going to bring it over there and hopefully chisel out a nice piece. Next time I'm here, I'll show you guys. But they have not only sand dollars, but these other type of seashells. It's the previous slide. I'll show you again, right there. These pieces of sand dollars, and then these other type of seashells. Now, what's interesting about these seashells, now I don't know what type they are not fossilized. They're actually still the seashell. But they're embedded in this, you know, I don't know what type of rock it is, sandstone or some type of sedimentary rock. So after the flood, this area obviously was underwater with sand dollars and seashells. But it wasn't millions of years ago. We have a seashell there that's still, you know, the shell is not fossilized. And there's thousands of them. You can see right here, they're just all through there. Now, I have this little guy. I don't know if it's a land snail or a sea snail, whatever, but a seashell. But I found this on the boat-shaped formation, and so it's in my collection in California. But it's a nice little fossilized snail. Definitely the area was once underwater. Now, to summarize the evidence from the 60s up to the early 90s. That why we are interested in this site is, number one, it has the length of the Egyptian cubit, the 300 cubits that Moses would have used for the book of Genesis. There's a pattern of metal inside of it. Below ground, it shows a pattern with subsurface radar of some type of structure. Artifacts have been found on it, the petrified wood, that deck timber, the rivets, the fossilized rivets with advanced alloys. When they've did the mini excavation, rib timbers were found on the site of it. And then nearby, the marine fossils shows that this area was once underwater, and then also that inscription that was found a mile up the hill that shows the boat with the two birds above it. Now, in 2014, my friend from New Zealand got a permit to use resistivity, which is uses electrical current to scan what's below ground, and then the software maps out the resistance of everything it goes through, so that way you can get a shape. And so this was the first time anything has been done on the site since the early 90s, and so we were excited about this. We didn't tell anyone we were going. We wanted to keep it all hush-hush, and so we basically disappeared from the U.S., and then we let everybody know when we got out of Turkey that we were over there. And so we had brought some friends of mine along. I had a lot of gear. My friend Nathan and my friend Brandon, who's a videographer down in Hollywood, we were there with some drones. We had a lot of luggage. And we met with the local governor of the area. Now, sad to say, this guy is no longer in the in office. I don't know if you will talk about it, but you know, last year the coup attempt that happened in Turkey. If you keep up with international news, they had some faction of the military try to take over the government, and they didn't succeed. But the current president has blamed this American-Turkish guy living in Pennsylvania named Gulen. One of his rivals, he believes this Gulen guy caused the coup attempt. And so he purged a lot of people in the government. They fired thousands of teachers, police officers, military people, arrested thousands of people, and this guy got arrested. They accused him of being part of the Gulen supporters. So we lost one of our contacts there. Here's some filming we were doing during that trip, some of the local Turks. Now what's interesting on this photograph, they don't always dress, it's not like Saudi Arabia where they cover themselves 100% in black, the women. Here you have some women dressing like Europeans, others just having the scarf on their head, and then still others, you know, full black. So Turkey is considered a secular Muslim country. There are Christians there. It's a very fertile region. This was October that year, 2014, and you can see all the stuff they're growing and selling in the market. Now the purple cabbage on the right, that's the size of your cabbage you find in the store here today in the US. That green cabbage is the size they're selling over there. So that's probably from Noah's patch in the garden. He was a giant, so he had to have giant cabbage. But definitely fertile with the lava flow there, the volcanic region. So good soil for growing things. Now when we were there, we had to cut our trip short. If you remember, I don't know if you keep up with international news, in 2014, ISIS was fighting the Kurds in northern Syria, and there's a town called Kobani, Syria, right on the border with Turkey, and it's a Kurdish town that ISIS had surrounded, and the Turkish government had closed the border down, so no refugees were getting out, and they were not allowing any weapons or food into this Kurdish town. Now the area of eastern Turkey around Mount Ararat, where we're at in this town, they're all Kurds. So the Kurds started protesting. They were really upset at the Turkish government for not helping them fight ISIS. And so right in the middle of our trip, they suddenly had these violent street protests. We had to stay in the hotel towards the end of it and change all our flights to get out of there. And the Turkish government actually told us to get off the site and leave the country. You can see the smoke from up there, burning tires and cars. They killed, the night before this photo was taken, they killed 2 teenagers. The Turkish military. And so even though our guide told us to stay inside the hotel and wait for our flights, we went out. So me and my friend Nathan snuck out of the hotel, and we had to go see the protest. Now the protest was over. It was a rainy night, but you can still smell the tear gas in the air and see burning tires. So we took a bunch of photographs. But anyways, we were there long enough for about 2 weeks to get the data we needed. And so we're going to talk about that next. So what is underground at this site? Now, resistivity is used at, for example, this is a site called Old Sarum in the United Kingdom. It's a Middle Ages site that has a moat and a town inside and then a castle in the middle. And they use resistivity and radar to map out what the town looked like without even excavating it. And here's a reconstruction just from using remote sensing, it's called. So geophysical devices like radar and, again, resistivity. Now, I met John Larson, our guy who's an expert in resistivity, in 2005 in Jerusalem on a dig. He was helping us map out the underground tunnels in Jerusalem, here outside the ancient city walls of Jerusalem with the resistivity. Anyways, I got the permit in 2013 to go back in 2014 to do this. And so here he is surveying the site. Part of the process is you have to survey your lines out, and then, because you got to know exactly where you're obviously doing the resistivity. And then you put in these steel pins, and you can put them as often, depending on how deep you're trying to go into the ground with electrical current. For his stuff, he was doing it every 3 meters, the pins, so every 9 feet he would put in a pin. And here's a little video. There's no sound, but here's a little video showing that process that we went through on October of 2014. You can see the little people down there walking on it. It's really deceptive until when you get on it, then you realize how big it is, being over 515 feet long. Now, he brought a ton of cable. As you see the cable there, the yellow cable, he has one that was over 515 feet long because he obviously had to do the whole site. And so he brought all this on his luggage into Turkey. Here they are doing their survey lines to mark out where they're going to scan. And then all those cables connect into the central processing units that record it onto a thumb drive, the data, and it's powered by 2 car batteries. So you can take it way out in the field. Geologists use it, archaeologists use it, so you don't have to have a power line nearby to plug into. You can just use car batteries. No, I might be wrong. I think they did the pins every meter, so every 3 feet. Right there looks pretty close. So here's an example. Every night when he got back to the hotel, he would explain the results. He would do a quick, he would put the data in his laptop and do a quick little processing of it. He had to do the real processing when he got back to New Zealand, but on the trip we would get a preview of what the scans were showing below ground. And so every night was really, it was like show and tell. It was pretty cool just looking at the scans because no one has dug there, so we're trying to see what's underground. I'll explain the scans in a second, but right now I'm just showing you photographs. So here it is, the scan results. Now we did 13 scans total, 10 lengthwise and 3 crosswise. So here's, again, the object, and I highlighted it in yellow, if you can't recognize it there with the other dirt. Now, here's the lengthwise, one of the lengthwise scans. Now, I overlaid this, so it's not 100% to scale, because I'm overlaying his data onto my photograph, or Nathan's photograph. Now, the first thing we notice in this first scan is that there is a consistent layer almost throughout the whole site, especially on the upper end, that the red arrows are pointing out. Now this layer is 3 meters down, it's about 9 feet. You hit this almost solid layer. I'm gonna call it a layer. You can interpret it, we won't know until we dig, but there are 3 of the, there's the main hall layer, and then there's this main layer here being pointed out, and then some others show fragments of a layer above it. So the working theory is that these are the decks of the boat. Now we're looking at where the red star is, the bottom end, and again it's showing within 9 feet this layer, and then when you get to the top end, that same solid layer below ground. Now we do one of the cross scans. Again, it's showing, especially on the western side, a solid layer, again, right below the ground, and then a layer about 12 feet or 15 feet below that. Here's a close-up of that being pointed out with the red and blue arrows. Then another, now what's interesting about this scan, this one was done down the middle, and it's actually picking up the shape of the hull. Now, if this was a natural formation, it'd just be a jumble of like rocks and dirt down there. But what it's showing, and you can see where I drew, let me go back again. Notice the brown lines. It's showing that it's curving up near the end. Definitely where the object ends is not just spilling out or just natural. And again, it's showing a couple layers right below the ground there. Here's a close-up of the bottom end, the lower end. Now, this radar resistivity matches the radar, too, that was done in the 1980s for this lower end of the boat. Now, the other cool thing is that they're showing either rib timbers or support beams, this whole pattern going, looks like the rib cage of an animal underground here. This is, again, resistivity. This is like a slice. So you're looking like a cake slice or a bread slice. So you're looking at the side of it. And you see that same pattern in the other scans. Now, in regards to the rib timbers, what's interesting, on this side, we're looking at the western side where the earthquake had dropped a lot of the soil, about 30 feet there. You find that the erosion is around what could be underground, just like when they did the mini excavation and shaved off the soil. On this side, the erosion goes around what could be solid objects there, and I'll explain why we know that. So the erosion from the snow melting goes around whatever is right below the soil, like little humps on the side of the formation. And again, we're talking about this idea that if this is a ship, the ribs of the ship. Now, the other cool thing is the radar, the resistivity shows that it has all this data for the side of the boat, but then it has this big square hole near the upper end. So you can theorize it's the one door. Who knows until we excavate. But here's a top-down view showing all the data we're collecting, but except for this one entrance, and then down the middle as if it was the ramp system. Now, they also processed it in 3D, and what the interesting about the 3D shows, I didn't really talk about this, but in the middle of the boat is a limestone rock that's right there. And so the theory is that the boat came down from where that stele, that inscription was found 1 mile up the hill, and it impaled itself on this rock and ripped out part of the boat on that western side. And no one knew how big that rock was. Some people have claimed that, oh, this is the rock that's forming again, the boat. They're thinking that the mud flowed around this rock, and now we have the shape. As we talked about earlier, the pointed end is the opposite way, so that couldn't be true. But now we know exactly the extent of the rock below ground from the resistivity, which no one knew before. And again, it's showing that if this was a natural object, it would just be a jumble of material, rocks and boulders and mud. It would not have a consistent shape like a hull of a ship inside the mud there. Now, you can look up more information. It's a small one-page site, but the guy who did the radar scans, John Larson, that is his website. It just has maybe some more photographs. But what I showed here is stuff he doesn't have on the public website. So you guys have a little more information than what he's putting out publicly. Now, in examples of ancient boats that have deteriorated, to kind of give you an idea, remember Noah's Ark would be at least 4,000 years old if you use biblical chronology to figure out the time frame. Here's what's called the Sea of Galilee boat. This is a boat from the 1st century during the time of Christ, and it's found on the Sea of Galilee. It was used for about 100 years. So this is from 50 BC to 50 AD. They dated the different wood fragments. And so this was actually used during the time of Christ. So who knows? They call it Peter's boat, but who knows whose boat it was. And it's in a museum there in Israel. Pretty cool. Now they have this boat called the Satan Hu. It's a Viking burial ship. It was excavated in 1938. Now what's interesting about this ship, everything deteriorated and left the shape of the hull. And inside, I'll show you a close-up. Well, here's some, they found a lot of treasure. It was a royal burial ship Vikings used. But it had rivets, just like we had in Noah's Ark. So all the wood disappeared and left all the rivets in place that were holding the planks together in the boat. Now, if you were to ask scientists, did Noah's Ark exist or the flood? Obviously, as we know, most would say no. And in fact, these are biblical scholars. We know the guy from the bottom, the Irvin Finkel, what he thought. But like the guy at the top, he's a professor of biblical studies. Really sad what they believe. But there are a few who have had positive comments about the boat, and obviously it needs to be excavated. Dr. Archeologist, he's the one who discovered the Hittite Empire, a world-famous archaeologist. He's passed away now, but he's the founder or father of Turkish archaeology, and his excavations proved that the Hittites existed, which is one of the big things for the Old Testament. And he commented on this site. This guy we met in 2000, a Turkish geologist who's also a believer in creationism, and he mentions that the facts of what's found there up to, this was before we did the resistivity scans, this is 2000, shows that it could not be natural, that there's nothing there that disproves it being the possibility of Noah's Ark. We're almost done. So what's our next plans? Well, right after that resistivity scans were done in 2014, we used that, obviously we reported everything to the Turkish government, what we did, and we used that to apply for permits to excavate. In 2015, they gave us permits to excavate. Now, what happened? We have not excavated yet, so that was 2 years ago. Every year we've tried to excavate, usually around the summertime, something happens over there. So in 2015, the Kurds had a big uprising in Turkey, and they restarted their civil war kind of with the Turkish government. 2016, last year, we had a big team, about 25 people going in August last year. And mid-July, the coup happened, the attempted coup. And so they had a state of emergency, shut everything down. And so that's kind of where we're at this year. This year, they're still under a state of emergency. They're still firing people and arresting people. But we did find out last week from our contact over there, he went to Ankara, the capital, and they told him it's looking good for us to do work on the site next spring. So hopefully, if the winter goes well over there, and it's the Middle East, so anything could happen, but if it goes well, we can go back and actually do our dig. So what are we going to do? Based on the resistivity results, we have 3 spots we want to dig. Now, this is a massive object. So the goal is to prove that what you see in one spot, it does continue to other areas. And I'll describe especially Area A that we want to excavate. And our archaeologist drew up these plans, and I'm going to show you some of why we want to excavate that area called Area A. Now, this area was scanned. You can see the cable there, the yellow line, in 2014. And where the red arrows are at, that is actually the pins, the steel pins they put in there. Now, my friend who was helping John do these scans, he was pounding in the pins. He said that when they tried to put that top pin in, it hit a solid object about 2 inches under the soil. And they tried all up and down there, that's about 20 feet. And it was a solid object, and it was about 2 or 3 feet wide. It was a couple inches under the soil. And since we don't have permits, we're not going to dig it up. But anyways, there's something solid going up and down. Now, we're going to assume it's a petrified beam or something. But when they moved it over just a little bit, it was able to go right into the soil. But that object was so solid that actually, he said they had bent the end of the steel pin. They were just they didn't know what they're doing. They thought, oh, maybe just hit some solid dirt or something. And so they just kept on pounding and actually bent part of the pin. Here again is another view of that same site. Now, and then at the very top, they had a pin go in. Now, the results for that is really interesting. It shows a solid material, a beam or something, going down, and then a horizontal one coming right out. And then underneath the soil going into the formation itself, there are other solid objects. So the idea is that those horizontal beams connecting to rib timbers are joists that would connect to the ribs of the ship and go into the ship. Let's go backwards, kind of show you again what the resistivity is showing right for that site. And so this is where one of our main pits we want to dig. It's about a 15 feet by 15 feet pit. Anyways, that's our main goal. Now, I'll just go back that one slide that had kind of the other squares. And in area B, the resistivity showed a really solid, resistant object right below the ground. And so that's why we're really interested in that. And my friend from New Zealand who saw the results, he said if you were to do this like on a modern construction site, it would be something that is either an air pocket that has, because the air is highly resistant to electricity. So if you shoot air through here, you're not going to get electrocuted. Or he said it's glass. So obviously we're like, oh, maybe it's the wind window. We don't know what it is, but it's something really highly resistive. So we're going to check out area B. And then area C, again, is showing areas that could be possibly mud-filled rooms where we're looking for preservation, things that are petrified down there that would prove it's a man-made object. And then there's a whole, it's 515 feet long. So other teams, our goal is to prove, especially area A, what's there that's man-made. Then who knows, who else will, Turkish government, National Geographic, whoever, they can go in and dig it up. I have a little video I'm going to show you, and then I'll take questions. Is it playing? Let's see. Oh, there we go.
If I get up here, I can...
You know what? I copied the wrong video over. That was us on the tractor. I was going to show you our little trailer. We did some interviews with a local guy who's been kind of watching over the site, and we're working on a film about the search. So anyways, I can't show it to you now. I don't think you want to see us on the tractor again. So if you have any questions, I can take them now. If not, we can go home. Yeah. Oh.
What about funding? This is a remarkable investment that's been made here. How are you paying for all this? I know that I've been aware of some of the expeditions in the past, and funding has very often been a major issue in trying to follow through on some of this stuff.
Yeah, so let me go back to our excavation plan. So we have a small plan, mainly focused on Area A, and our budget for this one is like a couple $100,000, I believe. And we do have international partners from New Zealand, Australia area, and America, and Europe, and then volunteers coming in. We have a whole team from Europe, about 20 people, and then the U.S. we have another 20, and then from New Zealand we have about another 5 people. So with the people volunteering their time, the funding usually is focused on equipment, the archaeologists, the Turkish government fees. So it's not, it's not it's within our reach to do what we need to do for phase 1. Now, obviously, you're talking to protect it. So once you dig out the site, you can't just leave it because of the harsh winters. So a lot of that funding actually goes to covering those holes we dig.
Okay, another question. When you showed the shells, I noticed in one of the slides there were some nodules that were red-colored like rust. Let's
see, this one?
No, it's not that. Yeah,
that
see
one.
the red streaks over on the side. I think there were some other that were even more nodular shaped.
That one?
Yes. How much has been done outside the so-called boat formation to ascertain that this is really unique, that the formations there really are unique? Because there are certain things about it that make me really wonder if it isn't just a geological formation.
Yeah, that's what, obviously, you have 2 theories. One is natural and one is man-made. So in regards to what they have done inside and out, they've done the metal detector scans on in the jumble of the mud flow outside of it. They've done the radar scans, and on the resistivity, we did go past the boat itself. Now those layers and the patterns of metal, it's only existing inside of it. And it's on the resistivity too, where the shape of it is only continuing inside. What you see above ground, that shape is showing below ground, but only inside of that. Beyond actually going into the excavation of it, that's all we have for the data. But I mean, now there are different theories. You can look up on Google the site. It's called the Durupınar site. So it is controversial. They're probably more atheists, but they did write an article back, I think it was 2003, a Turkish geologist wrote an article. He tried to explain this site, that it was a piece of rock that had broken off above hill, and this rock came down and settled at this site and basically forms this ship formation. Now, it's funny because our theory is that it's a petrified boat that came down the same thing, petrified boat being rock, and landed here. Now, his theory was written before the resistivity scans, and in regards to, is it just natural rock below, obviously excavations will be the ultimate, decider on what's there.
Well, as I look at this, I also try to imagine or think about the natural history since the flood for this area. And that has some impact on what we're actually looking at or looking for. Did the boat just disintegrate at the surface, and the shape is because of the bottom of the boat against the surface?
Yeah, that'd be like the Sutton Hoo.
In which,
yeah.
In which case, what you're seeing below the surface is stuff that is mostly leached down into the surface.
That's, the problem with that is that we're actually seeing these layers, the hull shape going up, and then above the hull shape, the layers. So versus if this was just like the Sutton Hoo, and I'm going to show you go back to that one again. If it's just like that ship that was found in England, which basically all the wood disintegrated, and it's left a shape, then you wouldn't find anything above it like the actual layers. Like here, they found the rivets. You can see the rivets sticking out in the sides, and then the shape of it. So we're thinking that this object is more preserved than just being the outline of a disintegrated boat based on the resistivity.
Right. Well, from the resistivity scan, especially toward the end, you show a layer that looks like it could be the hull of the boat. As it comes up toward the ends, what you've marked in red, I guess you could say, but it shows up
there's
in
another
some of
one
the others.
here. This one, yeah.
This kind of implies that like the Sutton Hoo boat, that it is sunk down into the mud
we
there.
believe that this is covered. I mean, what you're walking on, obviously it's below ground, so everything is covered with mud and dirt and rock, and so it would like the Sutton Hoo, you were going to excavate. What we're hoping though, what we'll find are preserved rooms and layers, like deck layers, more than just like what they found in the Sutton Hoo. Now Sutton Hoo, they know it's a ship. They found the evidence of it, even though it was just the shape of the ship, because everything else had decayed. It still is a ship. Now what's here, we hope is more than that, and not just because of like Ellen White talks about gopher wood lasting, didn't decay for hundreds of years, but also because it was the stone, the rock before. The wood before the flood was like stone and rock. So we're hoping that even with the petrification process and making fossilized wood, that it preserved a lot of the boat. And this from the ancient historians who talk about people going to the area, even hundreds of years or thousands of years after the flood, they mentioned they could still see the remains of the boat there.
Right, I was interested in those comments from 257 BC, for example. Has anyone tried to determine what the erosion history of the site is? It looks like there's definite erosion in that area, it looks like a lot of, in other words, certain areas you build up in erosion, you know, where material settles, but most of a slope like that is going to be wearing down through the millennia. And it appears, if your theories are correct about what's under the surface, that at least part of that history, you will have had material settling in the side of the boat. Has anyone really tried to come up with a recent geological history of this area?
Not from a creation standpoint. Everything you find online about this region is from an evolutionary standpoint. You know, evolutionary geologists, so the Turks, even some Americans, Europeans. So when they talk about Mount Ararat and the volcanism in that whole area and the plate tectonics, it's all from millions of years and their view. Well, I have not seen anything, just especially now you're talking about something like really focused on this one little area too. I have not seen anything written up describing from a creation standpoint how.
Well, I would put forward that the theory that this whole area has eroded away, perhaps tens of meters at the most, and certainly quite a few meters, and that this area where the boat was originally a depression that filled in as the boat disintegrated, and then it's eroded away around it, actually leaving what was originally a hole somewhat elevated, and the material of the boat buried
you saw
in
from
what was originally a hole.
Well, one thing you did see early on is what the earthquake did.
Right.
When it dropped the sides away from the shape, but it kept the shape there. So we know definitely earthquake activity recently has exposed it more, I should say, this area, by dropping the soil away around it.
Well, that could be rather serendipitous that the earthquake happened, but it also really, in my mind, raises questions about whether it's a natural geological formation or not.
We'll find out someday.
The earthquake really.
The whole region,
questions.
again, a lot of plate tectonics happened there. There's a lot of earthquakes in that region. The most recent, where one of the villages we were in actually collapsed and killed a bunch of people. I think it was 2005. A big earthquake hit that area and killed a bunch of people. Anyways, if you want to talk more afterward, I got some other people, and people are leaving, so I want to see if anyone else has any questions. But good questions.
Any other
There's
questions?
one actually right there.
Oh, there we go.
When is your next trip?
We are leaving tomorrow, but we're not doing anything. We're not excavating the Ark. What we're doing, we are going to survey, do some aerial drone work at the end of the month. We're going to go to Armenia. As you saw there, the history of Armenia is really connected to this whole area. So we're just going to, for the film, we're going to document those archaeological sites that show like where the oldest shoe was found and the advanced metallurgical sites in Armenia right across the valley. So we're doing that, and we're doing the drone work. But based on our conversation with the Turkish government, we're hoping next spring, obviously we can't do anything in the winter, so May, June.
Okay. Ellie has a question.
Yeah.
So when you do go dig on the Ark, you have actual permission to dig inside so that you could see
Yeah.
room? That's cool.
Yeah. It'll be the first time that it would have been done. Obviously, if someone else did it, we would see the whole. So it would be the first time it was done. So we hope to expose, because right now we're just doing geophysical stuff, which is the radar, metal detectors, resistivity. So.
Okay. Oh, we have one more question.
Yeah, one more right there. And then we can go.
Just a question. You mentioned how tall you estimate the ark to be. I think you said you went by the biblical measure.
The height? Well, in
Yeah.
the Bible, it says it was, without misquoting the Bible, let me pull up that slide. The 30, oops, it was right here. Yeah, 30 cubits high. So if you do the math for that in feet, 30 times 20.62 inches, divide that by 12, is that 50 feet?
I'm just wondering how tall the people who like Noah's time were be if that.
Yeah, so if there's 3 decks, and then you try to divide that up, and you see how.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, then you're trying to figure out, well, could Noah, like, how tall was? We don't. The Bible doesn't say how tall Noah was. We just from Ellen White's writings, and also from Moses after the flood when they went to Canaan, the giants. They give some like Goliath, his measurements, and then I believe in Judges talks about one of the kings in Bashan or someplace in the Amorites they had like the big iron bed. So there were giants after the flood that we have some measurements. We don't know though before the flood. But obviously, if there are 3 layers on Noah's Ark, just using the Bible only, he would have to fit in those rooms. So you divide up the height of the ark by 3, assuming the hull itself was the first layer. I want to say, Tim, did you get a calculation? So let's get a feet.
It was about 50 feet in height.
Let's see, what's 30 cubits times 20.62? Divide that by 12.
51.55.
So yeah, about 50 feet tall. Divide that by 3. Not calculating the thickness of a floor.
17.18.
17 feet, okay. So, again, we don't calculate how thick the floor was, whatever, but, so we have at least, 17 feet per floor.
So it could be about 15 or.
Yeah, exactly, unless, I don't think he was hunched down there, but yeah. Any other questions? Okay. Oh, yeah.
Yes, there have
Yeah, that
been
mic.
some reports that some anchor stones.
Get the mic from here.
found in the valley.
Here's the mic. Yeah.
You can just try to keep it brief, because we're trying to.
Yes, exactly. There are some other reports about some anchor stones, with large stones with some holes, apparently for ropes or something, that could have been used to anchor the boat. Have you seen anything about that or heard anything
Yeah,
about that?
I have. There's a village just about 15 kilometers, about 10 miles from the site, that has most of what you're talking about. There's this huge stones. I have photos of them. I didn't put them in here just because there's so much to talk about, and I mainly focus on the actual what's found at the site versus anywhere else. But there are those stones, and they have holes near the top. Now, the critics have claimed that those are pagan stones, and that it represents the eye or something focused for the sun. Others have said, obviously, what they're actually called are drogue stones. So it'd be used, not anchor stones, but drogue stones are used to stabilize a boat in a storm. So they'd be thrown off the sides or kept on the sides, and as the boat goes through a storm, it keeps it stable. So they use the term drogue stones. Because obviously at the end of the flood, anchor stone, Noah didn't throw the anchor stones overboard. God kind of directed it into the mountain region, and it landed, as Ellen White talks about. So they didn't have anchors for that. But yeah, there are stones nearby. I don't, besides showing you photographs of that, I don't have an opinion of them myself. There's a claim that there are 2 stones. So I can find a photograph that shows. I'm trying to show a region, like the whole area. Let's see if I can. Yeah, actually, I don't have Google. Here we go. Let's show you. Oh, here's the Google Map one. So I'll point out. There you go. So that's the boat formation. So if you go on the top right, top right area, that's actually downhill. So you're looking north in this Google Map image. A couple people said they have seen the same type of stones a quarter mile down. So not in that village, but right near the site. We went there in 2014. My friend Debbie and my friend John, they were all down there looking for these stones. But because those other areas are in the mud flow, so things are changing. They didn't find anything, but I have not seen personally myself any photographs of these stones nearby. So if they could find one, that would connect it more with the ark. For now, there's this village that's further away that have these stones with holes at the top, and so I'll leave it at that.
I think there's at least one report that the stone is not from the region. That would be very telling if it
Yeah,
were
it would be nice
of
to
a
analyze the
different
rock.
geological source.
Yeah.
Also, I've heard that there were reports in the region that there was a structure that was supposed to be the tomb of Noah. Have you heard anything about that story?
I heard the story. I have not seen a tomb, so I don't know. And so that area you're talking about is the same village that has those anchor stones. And a lot of things have been destroyed in that village. So the locals dig up anything with the cross, especially after. Oh, yeah, one more.
Yeah, the wife and I have been doing a little reading on that. I'm going to be devil's advocate. I won't take too much stock in those stones as pertaining to the ark. Also, the ark, I understand, was rudderless. No steering mechanism on the ark. Just the one skylight, from what I understand. Also, the ark was pretty vacant on its voyage, fairly empty. It's my understanding there was plenty of room for people.
Yeah.
Had they wanted to go on board, there would have been enough room for all to go on board, or a good portion of them to go on board. So this, it was well designed,
Yep.
and like I say, so it's a very interesting study, and this looks very hopeful. I mean, this is.
Yeah, we're hoping next year, if we do excavate, then maybe we come back in the fall and give a report. Either way, so I'll let Tim know what happens. So.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Andrew. It's very interesting information, isn't it? Yes. How many of you think we should have him back to give us an update? Okay. Yes, or I'll be in suspense in the meantime and see what they find out over there. And we want to keep Andrew in our prayers, don't we? As far as his endeavors, you can see he's up to all sorts of different initiatives. And as you can tell from his stories, he has an appetite for adventure too, right? So we want to keep his safety in prayer as well as he continues on his journey. And so once again, I want to thank you, Andrew, for coming and for sharing with our congregation. And unless there is any concluding question or comment, we'll go ahead and have closing prayer. Let's bow our heads. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time we could spend together evaluating this possible site of the Noah's Ark location. And Lord, we want to continue to uplift Andrew in prayer as he does these different activities, that you would keep him and his teams safe, and that you would guide them in all of their endeavors, Lord. And ultimately, we know that we can have faith in your word. And may all these activities, may all this information strengthen our faith in the biblical record. And may we look forward to your soon return, Lord. Prepare our hearts for that day. We love you and pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you.